I'm going to do a little bit of lecture at the beginning, and then at the kind of towards the end, I'm going to save time for questions, and mainly just in case other people pop on. I know there's going to be a couple of people that are going to be late to class, and so I want to save question time till the end. Most of the time, the questions at this point in the semester revolve around the paper in some way, which is fine. And I'm going to leave plenty of time for that. And I'm trying to get all my screen lined up here. Okay. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about adulthood. So basically kind of picking up where we left off last time, with late adolescence, emerging adulthood, and we're going to work our way towards endings or late adulthood. I'm hoping we can talk about death and dying at the end. I'm not sure if we'll get that far. We're going to give it a shot. We're going to do a couple of breakout sessions too. And we're going to do one here in about 10 minutes. And just a couple of quick announcements. The paper's due next Saturday. Anytime during the day, you can turn it in. And the final exam will be open starting on Friday, the 11th, which I think is the 11th. Yeah, Veterans Day. We'll have the exam open Friday, and it'll be open until the following Wednesday. So you can take that. I put in the email or in the Moodle message, I'm trying to edit the study guides because I'm trying to keep in touch, keep on top of like when I change editions. And I know that I missed some questions. Like I know that there's some questions with no answers or answers with no questions. I just missed those. You don't have to worry about those. And then there are probably a handful of questions that you might have trouble finding in the book. If you have trouble, I've probably taken those out too. I'm doing my best to kind of weed them out as I go, but I know that I missed some. So just FYI on that. And if you're listening to the recording, please, just know that I know that there's some questions that don't have answers, advice, and answers that don't have questions. So you can skip all those. Can't think of anything else. I'll be grading the exercise 3 this coming week, and I've gotten your APA. I gave everybody full credit on the APA assignment. 1, because it took me too long to grade. 2, I also gave feedback, some super general feedback to everyone, because the mistakes, all the mistakes that were made were basically the same thing in terms of like how to cite a quoted source versus an unquoted source where you're paraphrasing. Some people did it fine, and then there were others that maybe had trouble with that. And so I just gave you like a example in the feedback. And just keep in mind that if this is your first class, you're going to make mistakes on APA. That's kind of how it goes. If this isn't your first class, then you probably will be fine either way. The APA in terms of the assignment is only about, I think, around 5 points of the grade. So don't worry about losing a ton of points. But the grammar of the paper matters probably more to me. In other words, how clear and concise you write, which basically writing means rewriting. That's kind of how you learn how to write better. Usually the first time you write something is not usually the best version of that writing. Typically it's the second, third, or fourth. I know that sounds really difficult because I realize that some of y'all have multiple classes and you're finishing papers and finals. And so writing at one time might be all you can do. I totally get it. I'm just FYI, if you can write anything way ahead of time as much as you can, it really does help. All right. Now, having said that, we're going to talk about adulthood. I've put all these slides up on Moodle. I just did it today. There's a bunch of them. There's 72 slides. We're not going to go through all 72 slides, but I've had students in the past that really enjoy having the slides that kind of go along with the reading. So that's why I put them up for you. We are going to definitely hit a few things. I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit in the slides. Uh, and just like always, the slides are kind of like background information. Then I'm going to elaborate clinically on a couple of things. I'm going to line my screen up so I can start sharing with you guys. If anyone's having trouble seeing it, please let me know. Um, we talked about most of all these the last couple of classes. Just a little bit of a reminder. The other thing is, I've put two documents on Moodle. One's about the stages, and one's just about theory, the different theories covered in the text. I think those would be super helpful for you. There's no assignment that comes with those, but those are really helpful, especially when you really start studying for the OPC or LMFT um, exam. A lot of students have found those to be helpful, and sometimes it's just helpful for you clinically. So I just wanted to remind you of that. And so this is just basically a quick reminder, a couple of things that we've talked about as we kind of head into um, adulthood. And adulthood is the longest of all the stages. It'll start, you know, 19, 20, 21, all the way until death. And so multiple decades. But there's different things that are happening inside those decades. And we're going to highlight a few of those. And we're also going to talk about a couple of clinical things, just generally speaking. I think Dr. Armstrong gave me this little graphic. I thought it was kind of interesting that when when you're young, you get a lot of time and energy, but not much money. And then you have a lot of money, but not much time. And then when you're older, hopefully you have time and money, but your energy is a lot lacking there. I read an interesting article. It's from a book from an MD that was talking about exercise even into older age. And so there's a place aerobically called VO2 max, where it's basically like you're literally um, at this tipping point of like how much oxygen you can take in versus how much you're using. And it's like that max place where your heart rate's going like pretty much as quick as it can to refuel. You're not really running out of energy per se, but you're running out of oxygen, that tipping point. And he was talking about VO2 max in older age. There's really no um, noticeable change in VO2 max until you get to be around 75, which is really fascinating when you think about it. What that means is anytime you start like exercising, for example, anytime you start exercising at any age is a good age. It doesn't really matter when it is. So in other words, if you're 50 and you decided to start walking, and then all of a sudden you're wanted to, do a 5K or something, you could. Now, obviously, there's other physical limitations that we could have for sure. But in terms of our aerobic um, capacity, we have aerobic capacity and cardio capacity even into older ages, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it. We know that's true of the brain as well. We know our brain is very elastic. I always bring things like this up because I'm reading more and more about just kind of how, like for example, how exercise, for example, really affects and can have a positive effect on people that have depression or anxiety. It has a really positive effect because it gets people moving. It kind of makes you get out of whatever's going on, and it helps your brain kind of focus on something else, which is really helpful. And so this is my kind of shameless plug for exercise, even into older age. I think it can be very, very good for you. It doesn't mean you have to all of a sudden you're going to be an Ironman triathlete. That's not what that means. It just means moving. Any kind of movement can be really, really good. Okay. These PowerPoints is kind of a combination of like chapters 13 through 17. So it's kind of like jam packed several different chapters into one. Um, and so we're going to talk about this transition from adolescence to adulthood. Um, physical development, sexual development, cognitive development, careers and work. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about, I don't think I have it on here. We're going to talk about like relationships and things like that, which will happen. We'll talk about here in a little bit. I've talked a little bit about emerging adulthood, and I feel like there's a couple of folks that are going to write papers about emerging adulthood with, on various topics, which I think is great. Um, you, if some people call this late adolescence, it's called emerging adulthood. There's lots of different names that's been used. For our purposes, we'll call it emerging adulthood, which is that transition between 18 and 25, where obviously you're out of high school, you're in college or working or whatever you're doing between those ages, but your brain is really coming in, fully online, especially your prefrontal cortex. And that identity exploration that you started in adolescence is really starting to focus in. And uh, there's a lot of kind of self-focus that's going on. And there's this little bit of a sometimes, and I kind of noticed this not just in when I was a pastor, but clinically speaking, there's this feeling of like in between, like you're not in high school, but you're not maybe working your first career job kind of thing. Maybe you didn't go to college. And even if you're in college, there's this kind of in between feeling sometimes. And I've noticed that quite a bit in the past 10 or 15 years with certain folks. Um, on the flip side of that, you have an enormous amount of possibility in front of you and an enormous amount of potential in front of you. And we're going to talk about some of those things. And a lot of the things we're going to talk about in terms of like adulthood, like holding a job, economic independence, taking responsibility for yourself, all that happens as we become an adult. There's been lots of questions about this, and I'm going to do our first kind of breakout. Let me get back here so I can see everybody. I'm going to do our first breakout session with this question. Basically, like, how and when does someone become an adult? What's the parameters of adulthood? What's that look like? That could be something you picked up from the reading that you're doing. It could be something that you believe, maybe it's something that you experienced. But I want you to talk through just like, is there an age? Is it a, like, do certain things have to happen? But how and when do adolescents become adults? And I'm going to let you guys talk about that. We're going to do. All right, there you go. You should be able to jump in there. All right. So what did you guys think? When is someone, how and when does someone become an adult?
We discussed there are certain activities and or I would get rites of passage that happen in your adulthood that we use the phrase adulting, which is kind of this common thing that young people are using when they do something that is new or grown up. We talked about responsibility. We talked about independence. Mostly just kind of relaying our feelings of what we did. I can't remember her name, but one of us went to medical school. So when some of us shared our responsibility, it seemed like it was financial, living on our own, but because of their experience, they kind of they had to wait. I'm paraphrasing, but they had to wait a little bit before they felt that financial stability because they were still in school, but there was still those decisions you were having to make.
Yeah.
I'm rambling. I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job of reporting.
Oh, you're doing fine.
Covered it. Leanne and Stan and I kind of all agreed that there's kind of a transition where you have more responsibilities and more decisions that have to be made. And that was something that we all kind of laughed about because there's just kind of one day you wake up and you're like, man, I have to make all of these decisions. And we talked about, that's kind of like the transition that you see into adulthood.
Yeah. What kind of decisions? That's good. I like that.
Oh, we talked about, I mean, the simple ones, what am I going to make for dinner? What do I have to get from the store to do those things? Little things like that to, when am I going to pay this bill? I kind of made a joke. There was one day where my first day as a teacher, this was 8 years ago, I had 24 third graders look at me and somebody asked me a question and I didn't know the answer. And I had to make this decision. And I looked around for the adult in the room and realized that I was the adult in the room and that I had to make that decision. And so, I'm kind of rambling now too, but there's all kinds of decisions from the little teeny tiny, what am I going to make for dinner, to the big ones you have to make.
Yeah, that's good.
Hey, Jenna, we're kind of bouncing off what Ryan said about adulting. That's what kind of where we thought that t-shirt was invented was, I don't want to adult today, because it really ties back to all these decisions that you're faced with almost overnight, not realizing that every thought process has to come from an independent decision that we make.
Yeah.
Jenna, that was a really good example you had too. It was really funny.
Yeah. It's fun to, it's fun or not fun to look up and realize you're the adult, depending on your perspective. Good. Anybody else?
Just real quickly, we another thing that Jenna mentioned was responsibilities, and I just remember so vividly when, my dad would say, "Well, no, you got to pay this now, or you got to pay this now," and I'm like, wow. So it just kind of kicks in when those responsibilities fall in your lap, where it used to be your parents that took care of everything.
Yeah, good.
Somebody in my group mentioned an article, and I've been trying to find it, that someone posted. I missed the name. Could someone repeat what that was and maybe share it with us? Because I'd like to read it or find it.
Maybe that was the one I posted. Jeffrey Arnett, 2000. Oh, I've been looking into his work because he's just written so much on this subject, and I think he's the one that coined the phrase emerging adulthood, and he just takes it in detail and let's see. Oh, I don't have the. I can maybe send it to you or something, but it's Jeffrey Arnett 2000. You can look that up.
That's enough. I'll look it up. Thank you.
Okay, and but he's got several articles actually. I've been looking at it because I wanted to do that for my paper, and really gets into detail about this really interesting and kind of novel stage that 100 years ago it just wasn't like this, but we live in a different world now. Right, Dr. Bedard, and the challenges and the messiness and the complication and the fears and the anxieties are just seem to be different. And it seems like it's taking, there's like a period of hesitation, whereas before we kind of followed our peers into, okay, here's the next step. You're going to graduate from high school, and then you're going to either go to college or get a trade, and you're going to find a mate, and you're going to get married, and you're going to have a family, and and bam, you're an adult. But now there are so many options with this global perspective of the internet that I think we see so much more than our own bubble. And they're saying, wow, well, I want to make sure I make the right decision. And if I choose this, what if it doesn't turn out right? And if I get married, what if I get a divorce? And there's so much fear. It just seems like it's almost paralyzing for some of our young people. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
No, you're
But
fine. That's great.
It's
Well,
really,
we touched on that idea right at the very end. We got cut off. The new, and I don't know how old this is, but there's a new norm of living with parents longer. Even if you experience some independence, like in college or your first career, you might still be living with mom and dad, which probably hampers the idea of how many decisions am I actually making. And I'm sure there's a spectrum of some kids are paying rent. I have a 21-year-old home. You're a year old at home, which rent is about to become a new issue for her with us. But how old is that? How emerging is that new trend? It seems like it's been over the past 20, 15, I don't know, years.
that is part of it. Yeah, that is actually, or they go away for a while, but they come back home. They come back home. And in our group with Sarah and Danielle, we were talking about, when you get that awareness that you can launch, that, I think Sarah, it was in college that it happened to her, and Danielle she had a child and she knew, I've got to do this. So it kind of, for me, it was a job after I'd gone to school and I started my first nursing job, and I was walking down the hall to the hospital and going, I did this, I could do this, I could do this. And I don't need to ask my parents for money anymore. And I can do something on my own. And it's almost like just an awareness that comes over you that you don't have to depend on them. You love your parents, but you don't have to go back. Anyway, I don't know. It's a challenging time. I have a son going through it right now. So it's very much on my mind.
Yeah.
What?
It's definitely changed over time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, that's good. Anyone else? The one thing that sticks out to me about this topic is there's some correlation between housing prices, housing costs, and people in their 20s moving back in with parents or living with multiple people, like sharing costs. If we just did some basic look back over society in terms of, like, let's say housing costs over the decades, in the 2000s, and then even today, it's not always feasible for someone to get out of college or have a trade and buy a house. Let's say maybe they could rent, or they can get an apartment, but even apartments are fairly expensive, and so it makes it difficult for them. If they have student loans, let's say, that would be another variable. So there's multiple variables at play in people's lives, and there's I think Stan mentioned this financial variable is a big one. And in my experience with families view financial responsibility differently sometimes. In other words, some families might pay for all their kids' college and might help them find a house, kind of thing. And then some families might not do anything. They might just say, hey, I had to pay for my way, you're going to have to pay for your way, and after you're 18, There's no more free ride. You're on your own. And there, there's probably everything in between. And I'm not meaning to say these are extremes. I'm just saying these are experiences I've had with clients where it's, financially speaking, there's a financial component to people's lives that if they don't know how to do it before they're asked to do it, then they're going to struggle. Just the same thing, the same way if someone doesn't know how to have a relationship, let's say, or struggles with relationships, and I'm not just saying romantic ones, even friendships, if you struggle with it and you don't really know how to do it, and then all of a sudden you're expected to do it, you're going to struggle with it, right? Same thing with this is kind of an age-old one, studying. A lot of kids go through high school, probably the majority, and don't study real well, just kind of go through, and then all of a sudden they get to college and it's harder and they have to learn how to study or that kind of thing. There's multiple things that are happening. In other words, there's lots of hoops that they have to jump through, and we are finding ourselves in an interesting place because of COVID, I think, because COVID has changed a lot of these areas for this particular, excuse me, this particular stage of life. Mainly because we're kind of getting back to normal for the most part. At the same time, if you were in high school when COVID started, and then you finished basically isolated, and all of a sudden you're going to college, that's a big deal. That's a big jump. There's a lot of folks, adults included, and I've had several clients that's had this happen, that got fairly comfortable isolated, that are very extroverted people, but got very comfortable isolated. And all of a sudden they're now being asked to go back to the office or go back to school or go, whatever it is, go back to something. And they have social anxiety, or they're having trouble reacclimating. And that's happening a lot in a lot of different places. The only reason why I bring that up is throw that on top of all of the other developmental stage things that people are going through. And it's a little bit of a unique area. For the most part, if you're extroverted, you don't necessarily become introverted overnight. You don't really change your personality like that. So you can kind of help pull people out a little bit. But there's a lot of things that are happening out there clinically. I work with a lot of folks in the tech world, and a lot of them, their companies are asking them to start coming back to the office. A lot of them are struggling with that right now. And these are all ages. These are people in their early 30s and 50s, all the way into their 50s. So it's very interesting to see this phenomenon that's happening. And I think it's very similar to me, like what some of you guys have been bringing up, like kids moving back home because it's comfortable, it's safe, it's what they know. It's like a little bit of a baby step, maybe, kind of thing. It's very interesting that some of the things that are going on. And as a side note, I'm not sure why, and I probably need, this is just a personal, I'm not a huge fan of this word adulting necessarily. I get it. I get what it means, and it's kind of fun. I'm not a gargantuan fan of it for some reason. My wife makes fun of me because I make fun of it. So my kids use adulting all the time now because they know I don't like it, so they start using it. I'm not a gargantuan fan of it, but that's just, because I think there's connotations to me that come with it. But that's a side note. But it's definitely means something. It's taken on. I don't know how it started necessarily, but it's definitely taken on like this big meaning now in our world. Like we hear it, and it means things now. So, okay. Having said all that, what I want to do now is I'm going to make a huge jump to another topic that, clinically speaking, is something that you will for sure run into, whether you're working with emerging adults, middle adulthood, and even late adulthood, and that is substance and alcohol usage and abuse. So I'm kind of jumping here a little bit, but I want to talk about this because this is an area that, to me, I have Just speaking from my academic experience, when I got done with my master's degree, I had like a little bit of understanding and knowledge of this topic, but I didn't really understand it till I went to Texas Tech and got to work inside of their addiction treatment center. And they have a really cool program where they have students that come that are in recovery, and as long as they stay in recovery and follow certain steps, they get their tuition paid at Texas Tech. And I got to work under some really cool people that are kind of like leaders in the field, especially in the folks that are in their 20s, like in the college age area. But I learned a lot more about substance and alcohol use and abuse there. And so I want to share a couple of things. One of the things that we know for sure is when we start talking about alcohol usage for sure has been one area that hasn't changed a ton over the past 30, 40, 50 years. It's always been around. The one thing that has changed is nicotine usage, which we'll talk about here in a second. That has changed a little bit for sure. But I want to talk about alcohol first. And a lot of times there's this continuum you can see when it comes to alcohol usage. For the most part, you'll get most people will start experimenting in this 18 to 25-year-old range. And some people will come out of that into early and middle adulthood and not really become an alcoholic or abuse alcohol. They're fine, the majority of them. But there's going to be a certain percentage of folks that don't get out of that will continue to basically drink like they drank before. I did this fun exercise when I taught at Texas Tech. I gave our students it's like a quick little binge drinking assessment, and basically 5+ drinks at one time at least once over the past 2 weeks means you binge drink, which is a little bit interesting. In college, we had really interesting conversations about this because this was something that was happening with I would say 50% of the students. When we start talking about this idea of alcoholism or the disorder of alcoholism, that's a little bit more complicated because it involves more long-term, repeated, uncontrolled, compulsive, excessive usage. And obviously there's an impairment that comes with that. And all of the side effects of alcohol use disorder are plain to see for the most part. At the same time, there's some people that probably consume an enormous amount of alcohol but function fairly okay, at least from what people can see, but there still would be an alcoholic. And here's what I mean by that. Here's one of the things that happens. We have all of us, every person has what's called a hedonic set point, hedonic, hedonic set point in our brain that has something to do with our tolerance level of not just alcohol, but any other substance, including sugar. You could include sugar in this, caffeine, you can include in this discussion. So we have a level that we all have that we start with. And for the most part, when we consume alcohol, for example, I'll just talk about alcohol, for example. When we consume alcohol, we consume and we get to that, whatever that set point is. And if we stay kind of below it, maybe we're intoxicated, but we're not really drunk necessarily, but maybe we're like a little bit of a buzz. But if we go over that, we go over that set point, that's where there starts to be more issue, more impairment. Over time, what happens is, as you continue to use, that set point raises. Okay. And so in order to feel normal, like if this is normal, and our normal used to be here, we have to use enough to feel normal, right? We have to kind of keep using so we feel normal. And then if we wanted to get more inebriated, we'd have to use more. And so that set point over time will again raise, right? So what this means is you're building a tolerance over time. And so you might function okay as long as you're kind of drinking enough within that kind of set point, you don't have a lot of DTs, let's say, you don't have a lot of big time issues. It doesn't mean that it's healthy for you. There's tons of health things that are happening that aren't great. And that's just alcohol. If we talked about things like heroin or methamphetamine, opioids, the same set point applies, and it raises, and so you have to use to feel normal, and then you have to really use to feel the high or whatever high you're looking for. And so one of the reasons I bring it up this way is because for a long time, alcohol and substance use was viewed as like a moral failing, like we should just be able to stop, or we should just be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and not do it anymore and white knuckle through. And I'm not saying that some people haven't done that. There are examples of that for sure. Those are the exceptions, not the rule. The rule is that it's actually a disorder, and it's more likely a brain disorder more than anything, because what's happening over time is as that set point is raising, the other thing that's happening is inside of our brain, the limbic system, which is deep inside, that's also connected to basically the reward center of our brain, is being turned on constantly. In other words, it's like the go. You can think about it like a go system, like it's a green light all the time. So every time we take a drink, every time we take a hit, every time we ingest whatever the drug or alcohol is, we get dopamine rushing. That's the pleasure neurotransmitter that will rush, and it will feel good. And then glutamate comes in and locks that memory of feeling pleasure, so we want to repeat it. And that is directly tied to our reward center, which basically means our prefrontal cortex is the stop system of our life, of basically every kind of behavior. The go system's so powerful it overruns the stop system, and it doesn't allow the stop system to do what it's supposed to do. When you continue to use it, as long as the go system's on, it will always overrun the stop system until you stop. The problem is that you've raised this hedonic set point, you've turned this go system on constantly. So if you do try to stop, whether you stop on your own or you go to a facility, what happens is that set point's still high. It takes a while for it to come back down. It also takes a while for our brain to fully rewire itself back to what would be more of a normal rewiring. All right. So when you stop, literally, because your reward center is so involved, it puts off impulses saying, I think I'm going to die if I don't use, which is not necessarily true, but it's an impulse that we can't resist. That's one of the reasons why abuse, substance and alcohol abuse is so insidious, is because and that's one of the reasons why relapses are the rule and not the exception. People will relapse between 3 and 5 times before they will continue to stay clean. And that's something that if you work, like I worked in a facility that treated alcohol and drug usage, that's definitely something that you see over and over again, people that continue to struggle with what's really a brain disorder. And so I bring it up this way because I kind of wanted to talk about it neurologically speaking. When we start thinking about like rewiring the brain, like after giving up an alcohol or drugs, the two most difficult detox situations would be if you're giving up alcohol or things like heroin. Those are really, really difficult in terms of detox. Matter of fact, working with people that are alcoholic, depending on how long they've been that way, you definitely want them to have medical attention, because like the detox coming down from alcohol can lead to several different central nervous issues like convulsions or strokes. You can have really bad heart issues, so you want to have medical supervision. It's a little different with like things like heroin when they're like an opioid when they're coming down. There's not as many physical, biological issues, but it's still just as difficult. And the feelings are really, really severe, and the physical ailments are really severe. So the other part of this is that substance use, especially at certain times of life, can often be a self-medicating usage, like for anxiety, for example, or maybe there's an environmental factor, maybe someone's home life, or maybe something has happened with them, and they use that as a way of either not wanting to feel something or trying to avoid something. Stress is the number one relapse enemy. Stress is what a lot of times will cause relapse, different types of stress. I worked with tons of clients that were at the end of their, like say at the end of their time on probation, or maybe they had a court appearance that they had to go to for one thing, and a lot of them would relapse because the stress of it became so powerful, which is like in your brain, like if your brain's not involved in that abusive disorder, your brain thinks, why did you do that? But their brain's not thinking that. Their brain's thinking, I don't want this experience. The stress is too much. So in a lot of ways, what they're actually doing when they're using is they're trying to re-experience something that's better than a stressful experience. So there's a lot. I'm giving you guys like the 20-minute kind of recap of a lot of research and a lot of experience. I wanted to bring this one up specifically because this area, you will for sure in your, whether you're an LMFT, LPC, even school counseling, you're going to run into alcohol and substance use. It's going to happen. And so one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why we added or have a like an addictions class here at Amberton, which is and again, you're going to kind of touch on it. And so if you have a heart for this population, like folks that struggle with this, there's tons of really great facilities around DFW that always need good people to work with them. And there's a lot of great, really good research coming out about treatment now that's really good, I think. I mentioned smoking. We know that nicotine usage for most developmental stages has gone down over time, but vaping has come on board now. It's kind of taken the place of smoking. And so that's one thing that is definitely happening. I think even at my son and daughter's high school, there's been, or last year especially, there was this huge kind of push to like kind of get rid of vaping in school kind of thing. And this was probably not a great choice, and they actually got a lot of blowback. They started taking the bathroom doors off the bathrooms because people were going to the bathroom and they were vaping. So they thought, maybe if we take the bathroom door off, which ended up being a horrible idea, they changed it. But vaping has become kind of more widespread in adolescence for sure, but definitely is happening in most of the older, as you get older, it's still happening. Nicotine is probably, if not the most difficult, one of the most difficult drugs to quit. Nicotine's very difficult to get off. It takes quite a bit of work and quite a bit of time. There's also been really good strides made when it comes to nicotine usage and helping folks get off nicotine. I'm going to look at, there's a couple of things I'm going to jump to now. You guys are going to be able to take a full class in the area of career counseling, which is really, really good to take. That's a really interesting area to go into. Career counseling is definitely a niche. There's a lot of folks coming out of LPC and LMFT in those fields that are working now in career in college. I think it's super fascinating because you are working with folks like on the front end of it, like say in their early 20s, that are trying to figure out what they want to major in maybe, or the career they want to go into. But if you fast forward to maybe some of you that maybe had a different career and all of a sudden you decided you want to go into counseling. How did you decide to make that transition? There, if you can help folks kind of think through those things, think through what that looks like, it can be really, you can be really very helpful to people. So career counseling is a little bit of a difference between like mental health, solely mental health counseling, because you're going to take a lot more consideration of folks' personality, some of the skills that they have. You're gonna often talk more specifically about like how their personality and their skill or their ability or their aptitude, how do those all come together, what that looks like. And so one of the things that is very helpful, and I put this here at the last, it's very hard for people when they're in their 20s, let's say, to look at big picture, what they want to do in life. It's easier for them to kind of look short term, which is kind of a normal part of our process. As we get older, we a lot of times are able to kind of look at the big picture in terms of like, let's say, our career trajectory. Like I said, I've worked with a lot with folks in the tech industry, and there's a significant amount of them that have a very clear vision of what they'd like to do, like where they'd like to go. That has its own issues. Sometimes we look at the big picture too much without realizing we have to do these other steps to get there. And so this idea of career and work is, like I said, definitely a niche. It's definitely something that you can look into in terms of like how you could be more effective working with folks. One of the things is like just being knowledgeable about different fields, different companies. This ONET is super helpful. I don't know if I put it on here. There's a couple of good governmental sites that basically list all the careers, and they list it by area of interest and by salary and that kind of thing. But if we think about the impact of work, you're basically going to spend a third of your life at work, and there's going to be all the stressors that come with that. So that is oftentimes a big decision. But we also know that people change careers multiple times, even like not just change jobs, but change careers. It's not uncommon for people to change careers 2 or 3 or 4 times in their lifetime. That is not uncommon. And it's also not uncommon now for someone to get a degree in something, but also work in a field that's totally different than that degree. That's happening more and more as well. Some of this, especially some of the technology companies that have kind of shot up, a lot of times they don't really necessarily care, unless you're like in the engineering pieces of the data part of the practice or the data part of the business. They don't necessarily always care like what your degree in. If they can train you how they want to train you and you're coachable, that's what matters. So anyway, all right, I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump to a couple of things. Yeah, I want to talk about this. I'm going to take a step back for a second. Okay. Anyone, I kind of went through the substance and alcohol usage fairly quickly. Anyone have any questions about any of that before we jump to kind of the next area? All right. I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about attachment theory along the way. We're going to talk about it now in terms of like what it means in adulthood and what it means as we move into this area of finding a mate. And at some level, it also affects our other relationships, but it becomes most common for human beings to seek out romantic relationships as they progress through the developmental stages. And so there are variations of each of these styles, attachment styles, but here's kind of the main, just kind of the main three, the big three that come into play. And I'm going to talk about attachment style, and then we're going to talk about 3 areas of relationships that are important when we start talking about marriage or any kind of romantic relationship. And so when we think about attachment styles, our attachment begins in childhood, like we talked about, and continues to develop over time. As we get into adulthood, we still have a style of attachment, and it's either secure, avoidant, or anxious. It doesn't mean that we can't be in a relationship if we have an anxious attachment style, but it also means sometimes we attract that anxious attachment style as well. And so, for example, I'll just talk about anxious attachment. There's oftentimes this demand for closeness, but there's less trust. They tend to be a little more jealous and a little more possessive. And a lot of that's because their anxiety comes out when when they don't feel as close as they feel like they should. So in other words, if someone is in a relationship with someone that's pretty autonomous, let's say, or a little more independent, but this other person is more anxious, they're going to want to glob onto them more, which is going to, in some ways, make this person want to pull away a little bit more. And then you kind of get in this weird dance. If you have this avoidant attachment style, they're altogether kind of hesitant about romantic relationships. And so they're a little bit less committal. They might still get involved, but they become less committal because of hurt, or, they don't oftentimes process their emotions well. They don't oftentimes share their emotions well. And then if you have secure attachment, it's more of like a positive view. It's easy to get close, but you keep your autonomy, but you're still securely attached. And one of the reasons why you feel autonomous is because you have secure attachment. And there's lots of things that go into this, but these are just basic areas or basic places to think about. And so when we start thinking about adulthood, we a lot of times, obviously physical attraction is something that happens first for most people, but we also get into this area of like intimacy. And so as we become attracted to someone, then you a lot of times start talking, you build some type of relationship of some kind, and then maybe intimacy happens. And some of that depends on your attachment style, where you just divulge things or become transparent with someone. You talk about your life, your experiences, you share things with them. And it's this balance between like intimacy and independence, where you kind of keep yourself a little bit, but you're giving yourself to a little bit. And so there's this kind of dance that occurs. And this most oftentimes goes fairly well when we feel good about ourselves and our identity and kind of who we are. It doesn't mean we have to have everything figured out in our life, but it works a lot smoother when we have certain things figured out about ourselves, for sure. And then this idea of like different faces of love, and I'm going to kind of use this. I feel like this is in the book still. This idea of Sternberg's triangle of love. This has been around for a while. There's different ways to look at how we kind of fall in love. When we fall in love, romantic love, not friendship love, but when we fall in romantic love, oxytocin is released, the feel good, kind of the romantic neurotransmitter is released. And a lot of times that release can happen for a good 6 months, and we could feel good for 6 months, especially if we're having positive interactions, obviously, right? We're getting to know someone, we're becoming more intimate, and not necessarily sexually intimate, but emotionally intimate, especially. We become more intimate with them, then all of a sudden that 6 month, 8 month mark happens, and maybe something happens, and then we have to kind of navigate what that conflict might be or whatever that roadblock is. So if we look at this idea of intimacy and passion and commitment, so intimacy is more the kind of this idea of emotional connection with someone. Passion is just what it sounds like, more the flirtation, the lust, the sexual passion that happens. And commitment is exactly what it sounds like, this idea that I'm going to commit to you and you're my person. And so when you have all three of those kind of coming together fairly equally, you have consummate love, where you have you're passionate, you have intimacy, you have commitment. They all work together. There's no relationship that keeps all three of those together all the time. It's sometimes they ebb and flow. Where sometimes people, and this is some things that you might see clinically, depending on age, sometimes infatuation is super high passion, very little intimacy, and very little commitment. I've got a client I'm working with right now that is wanting to work on his struggles with past relationships, and he feels like he's just has trouble committing. So we talked about attachment and commitment, but he's got this friend, he calls her, that they meet up, hook up periodically just for sex, and their passion is very high, but they don't really see each other that much. They don't talk. There's really no commitment, so they have a very infatuation type relationship. And I actually asked him recently, like, do you have feelings for her? Does she have feelings for you? And he kind of blows it off like he doesn't, but he doesn't know if she does, but they don't really talk. Well, that's a perfect example of basically just a passionate relationship that's just infatuation. And it's only there for one reason. There's no intimacy or commitment at all. If you have affectionate love, you have a lot of intimacy and a lot of commitment, but the passion or lust pieces are diminished or lower, which is sometimes what I have seen with couples that have been married a little bit longer, maybe, and depending on the stage of life and depending on areas that they've struggled with, you might see that. And then fortuitous love, or when you get to this place where it's kind of like passion and commitment coming together, but very little intimacy. In other words, the connection wanes over time. Every part of these areas you can work on for sure. You can help enhance skills with couples, with people individually, to help them kind of work on and become more like passion or intimacy or commitment. You can kind of help them work through those things. Like if there's a trust issue, let's say with commitment, you can help build trust. Or intimacy is basically that connection. Sometimes you can even things like helping couples rediscover what connected them in the first place, let's say, can actually help them rebuild intimacy. And so when we just think about these three areas of love, these are kind of just some basic concepts to know. And I've sometimes shared these with my couple clients before, just to kind of let them see and let them kind of think through it and talk about it. This is not the only model. It's just a very basic one. It's super easy to understand. And it's also things that I have seen clinically, for sure. Any questions about this before we move on?
This is not a question, but I have a little bit interesting tip that I could share with you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Eileen. My husband and I were going through a rough patch at one time. And so this thought came to me that we should go back to the exact place where we first met and wear the same clothes that we wore that day and kind of just pretend like we're going through the exact same experience of meeting each other again the way we met, which was on a volleyball court at college. And we went back to that place. We traveled a long way to go there. We kind of dressed in the same basic color clothes and whatever that we were wearing that day. And we reenacted the scene of when we first saw each other. And you know what? It actually helped a lot. It helped us remember what we first kind of saw in each other and liked about each other. And anyway, that's a little tip.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Maybe that could help somebody. I don't know.
Yeah, I've actually done with couples. I've actually had them get their wedding photos out,
Yeah,
and look at them and tell me what they see in the other person, kind of thing. Or
yeah,
there's some questions I a lot of times use and say, like questions revolving around what you're talking about, Eileen, like when you first met, like what were they wearing? What were you doing?
Mhm.
What were you thinking? What did you think later? How often did you talk? What did you talk about? Questions like that then you can have them kind of do again, basically.
Yeah.
So I think what happened was neurologically, you can actually make oxytocin reappear right? Which is
That's
what,
what I think happened because
yeah,
the whole thing came back of the
yeah,
first time we met and how we
yeah.
kind of liked each other from the start. And
Mhm.
that was really good. Yeah.
No,
I
it's
like
good. No, it's good.
oxytocin.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, there's no perfect relationship. It doesn't exist. Um, we we know that there's nothing perfect. We just know we have to work on it. And it's sometimes hard work. Sometimes the work's not hard. But sometimes it's very difficult. And depending on your attachment style, that kind of has something to do with it too. And so that's very good. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? All right. Ba, 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 ba. Here's an interesting phenomenon. Cohabitation with adults has been increasing over the past little while now. Enough so that we have a fair amount of research on, uh, like reasons why, uh, if their marital satisfaction, um, they actually have lower marital satisfaction and increased likelihood of divorce, um, which is kind of interesting. But some of the reasons why they do get together is just kind of see if they like living together, kind of if they're compatible before they get married. Um, I would say now I would say 90% of my couples that I work with lived together before they got married. And I'd say almost 100% of them met online, like some dating site, um, as well. It's interesting because there's some theories about like the divorce rate, let's say, or the lower marital satisfaction. One theory is that when you're living with someone, you do learn their habits and things you like and don't like, and you do learn if you're compatible, even sexually compatible, or you learn all those things for sure because you're living together. Um, the one difference is when you get married and then you live together, you are already committed, even if you run into habits you don't like, or even if you run into things that upset you, or you're not you almost like when you're just living together without the commitment of marriage, you don't necessarily always weather that as well. That's just one theory that's out there, um, that happens. And so uh, I, I think most of the couples that I work with that did live together, obviously, they're coming to me because they're having trouble. So I've got kind of a slanted view in terms of living together before marriage. And then I've got couples that um, have lived together but just never got married, but just stayed living together, and they've been together for a while. That happens as well. And so um, the average age of marriage, this is in 2011. I think it's actually the same now. I think it's actually inched up for women. 28 to 29 for men, 26, 27 for women is the average age of marriage, the first marriage now, in America, which also means the average age of your first pregnancy has gone up for women as well. Um, we have a little bit of, well, we have a lot of research talking about like getting married in adolescence and how that leads to divorce a lot of times, not 100% of the time, but there's higher correlation there. Um, Premarital education is something that can be very, very helpful. Uh, this idea of 8 hours of premarital education is kind of the standard right now, that seems to say you have a higher correlation of marital satisfaction and longevity when you do premarital education, especially if you do 8 hours or more. That seems to be positively correlated with longevity. Let's see. There's a couple of things here. I'm going to throw this out. John and Julie Gottman are kind of the gurus when it comes to marital research. They've been researching marriage for decades. They've just written a book. I think Kira might have, my other class, someone said this. They have a book out now that's basically like Fix Your Marriage in 7 Days. I haven't read it. I've just heard about it. It's kind of interesting, but they're the ones that kind of came up with these 7 principles of marriage. And they also are the same ones that kind of, he basically said, I could tell if someone's heading for divorce within 15 minutes. If you find these, but between 1 and 4 of these areas that people are doing with each other, those are usually indicators of divorce. So if you're going the marriage direction, looking at Gottman's work can be very helpful. They have a great website. They have all their information on the website. They've even jumped into parenting now. They've jumped into like marriages as new parents and what that looks like and how to adjust. They've done a really good job of kind of staying also current. And so I think they do a good job of just kind of laying out some foundational information for those that work with marriages. These 7 principles are now probably pretty commonplace. I know in every marriage and family therapy program, they'll talk about these, and not just necessarily from a standpoint of like theory, but like practically how you can use them in therapy with folks. All right. I'm going to jump ahead for a second. All right, let me stop there for a second. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right, we're gonna jump back into our groups, and I want you guys to talk about a couple of things. One of them is when you think about clinically working with people, and I'm always trying to point all my classes back to like, how do we use this? Like, how do we use this information? What I want you guys to do right now in your groups is talk about a couple of things. The first thing is, what would be to you, what would be like some developmental type questions you would want to ask a client that comes to you that's in that emerging adulthood area but struggling with life, right? So, and when I say struggling with life, sometimes that's what they come with. They just say, I'm struggling with life, and they can't even put their finger on it. What developmental type questions would you want to ask someone? That's the first thing. The second one would be, what developmental and therapeutic questions would you ask a couple, let's say, that's coming, that just had a new baby, and let's say they've been married 6 years and they just had a new baby and they're struggling with their relationship? So what would you ask an emerging adult that's struggling with life developmentally, and what questions would you want to ask the couple that's struggling with having a new baby? Okay, those are things that, I mean, pretty common clinical areas. So I want you guys to talk about those. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that. And then when we come back, I'm going to wrap up a couple of things in the adult world, and then I'm going to have time for questions as well. All right. So there we go. All right. What are the life-changing questions you're going to ask the couple that comes and they're having trouble after they've had their first child? What things do you want to know?
I may massacre this, but we talked about several things, but we kind of came to the consensus on one question might be to ask the couple or the single person, whatever maybe that may be having developmental struggles. The question would be, what does that look like for you?
Okay.
In an effort to get them to see themselves where they want to be, and in the process of getting to that point, get them to see where they are now and how they will get from where they are now to where they want to be.
Okay.
And it's more of a bringing in a self-awareness component, along with trying to get them to bring out the emotions that they may be experiencing at that time.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, I'm gonna just chip in real quick to what Stan said. We talked about, because I think he said it, but I don't know if it cut out, but what does it look like? What you're dealing with right now, what would it look like without struggles is what, like, what would your
Exactly.
life look like without those struggles? Like, what ideally are you looking for?
Exactly.
So trying to help them see what their life would be if they weren't struggling
Correct.
with
Yeah,
whatever they're
because
struggling with.
we talked about how if I walked up to someone and I, like my coworker, and I said, I'm struggling, like I'm just struggling right now, that may mean something completely different than if Stan walked up to me and said, I'm just struggling in life right now. Mine may be, I've got a new child at home and I'm tired and I haven't slept and I feel like I'm not, like I'm not organizing my time well because I've got college and I've got this and I got that. While Stan may be, and I'm totally making this up, but he could be going through a divorce or going through this. And so what is, or if it's, someone struggling to pay bills, like what exactly is a life without struggle? Because you have to kind of figure out what the root of the struggle is before I feel like you can address ways to fix it
Okay.
or help.
Okay. Anyone else?
I had one that, uh, became a priority for my husband and I when we had a young one. And that's how often we schedule time for ourselves as a couple. Because I didn't realize how much my husband still needed that, even though it seemed like I didn't have capacity for that. And making it a priority and setting aside money to pay for a babysitter. And, it's hard when the baby's so young to do that and to see that and realize my husband's, he's needing attention right now too, because all my attention's going elsewhere.
Okay.
To the baby. So.
Yeah, just to tag on that, that was, we were kind of just exploring questions, and with the couple with the new baby, it started with, how much sleep are you getting? And then just questions trying to figure out, what is the nature of what brings them into counseling. And Amanda brought up the idea of stressors. And so we were developing questions on, financial, or their financial stress. Is there, what is your relationship with your extended family like? Do you have any extended family support? Did I say financial stress? That's the one that for me comes to mind from that time. Just questions along that nature or what we sort of came up with.
Okay. Good.
We talked about what were the what are your expectations, especially in either situation, but what are your expectations for you, like for husband and wife, and what are your next steps going to be, and coming up with a plan in either situation, whether it's the emerging adult or the couple. And I think that through kind of talking with my group and then hearing other people talk, a lot of times I mean, I feel like the class is primarily women. And so we hear a lot of what are the needs of my husband. But I think like we kind of talked about in our group, whenever the counselor would ask, you know, what is hard for you? And I think just sharing like both ends of like what's hard for the husband and hard for the wife. Because like going back to my point of it's primarily women, we say, well, we neglected the needs of our husband. But I think too, the husband needs to see as well, what can I do for my wife, or what does my wife need? So I think just being able to hear both ends of that, because like I said, we always think for as far as I, you know, think, women are always like, well, what did my husband need? But I think sometimes too, we need to ask, what does my wife need, or what does the woman need in this situation? So just for the couple to hear both ends of that, and then just kind of make a plan of what are we going to do now? What are our next steps? And kind of make short-term and long-term goals just to kind of help. Like for me, if I was the one going into therapy, I think Jen and I are coworkers. And so we often talk about this and we say, well, we agree that if we were the person getting therapy, we would want something like homework to work on to then when we come back the next time, just so we feel like we're getting something out of it. So just next steps.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think another area that we talked about was just developing questions related to what was each person's expectation in the relationship at that point in time, just to be able to kind of look and see if those expectations are realistic for that kind of stage of their relationship.
Okay. Or even if they had any
In our group,
expectations.
I want to credit. I want to credit Ryan with giving us, tell me how hard it is in either of those situations. And on that line, Kara, he discussed, he said a really good quote,
She left us hanging.
Maybe Ryan can jump in, but I think you're on mute, Ryan.
I was on the edge of my seat. I said something smart. I wanted to hear it. I think I said sharing expectations, even with the emerging adult and also with the couple. But the phrase I've used in ministry is expectations are scheduled disappointments. That's the phrase that I've used before. I
That
don't know
sounds
where I
very
heard that.
cynical. I'm sorry, Ryan. A little
It
cynical there.
does. Yeah.
but the expectations that a person have sometimes can be so excessive that they're just bound to be disappointed. And so that's important to delineate those and say, well, maybe we can pull that back a little bit and be a little bit more realistic in our expectations. You know, new mom and dad not getting much sleep. Let's not expect quite so much of ourselves. And emerging adult with all these things going on, let's just back up and let's take one little step at a time.
And that's something that they say in like the AA Al-Anon community, which is like for alcoholics, same thing. Expectations are preconceived disappointment. And yeah, take it one day at a time. Same for parenting or any relationship.
Okay. So a couple of things. I love all the questions. Especially questions that help people define more clearly what they're trying to figure out, or what they're going through, or what they're trying to work on. Any question like that is always going to be helpful. Developmentally speaking, when we think about like the couple, for example, you know, they're each individually going through their own stages of development, and then they're also going through stages of their relationship development, and then they have a newborn that's going through their own development as well. So you have multiple stages of development happening at the same time. One of the things that I think is hard for clinicians maybe it might be impossible, is to take our experience and set it to the side and focus on them, because we immediately want to, especially if they say something we resonate with, let's say, right, like they say something that we remember, let's say, when we went through whatever they're going through. When same thing with the adolescent, if the adolescent struggled, let's say they're struggling with going to college or not going to college or whatever, maybe we resonate with that. It's really difficult for us to set aside us and not start transferring, all of our, experiences onto them. That's very difficult to do. So what I have found, at least for me, that helps me not do that as much is think about these, obviously listening to them and hearing their experience, but also realizing they're in their own developmental spot. Like they're in their own spot. They're not in my spot, and I'm not in their spot. We might have similar experiences, and that's fine. And sometimes, and this is why I'm saying this is almost impossible at times. Sometimes we might bring up something we resonate with as a way of building rapport with them, but that's not, you don't have to do it that way either. I think it's just for us to be mindful of that. And so what helps me do that is just thinking about them, like what developmental stage that they're in. And then you can ask questions, based on that. There is a concept of adjustment, like in marriage, marital adjustment, like how you adjust to each other when you first meet and then you get married, and how you adjust when, kids are introduced into the system and that kind of thing. I mean, there's this idea of adjustment. And so sometimes you can think about it in terms of like how they're adjusting. And in any of the questions you guys were talking about, whether it's expectations or defining the problem or talking about the stress, is always important. You can do these anyway. Like you guys had different questions. All the questions are fine. And you kind of figure out your own style anyway as you go. But one of the things that helps me keep focused is to kind of think about this in developmental stages. That tends to help me a lot, especially if I'm meeting with someone that seems to reflect maybe my background or my experiences. It's really easy to get lost and start having a friendly conversation versus a therapeutic one. It's just easy to sometimes get lost. So that helps me do that. But all the questions you guys are asking are great. And I think that these particular scenarios are pretty common, at least from my experience. They're pretty common scenarios that are happening. And it might just be my therapeutic experience, clinically speaking. Maybe they're more common to me. But especially the couple. If you work with couples, you will run. This is something definitely that you will experience. Couples that come to you with some kind of an issue, that they struggle with, and most of the time, it was an issue already. Not the child entering the system didn't cause the issue. It most of the time enhances it. So a lot of times there was something going on before. There's one way to look at couples that struggle before they have kids. A lot of times kind of put some of the struggles on hold while their kids are at home, and when their kids leave, those struggles come back. That does happen as well. But a lot of times when couples come and they've had a child, let's say, or even if their child's 2 or 3 years old, a lot of times their struggles happen before the child. And so sometimes you can kind of start asking about like, hey, what was it like before, and try to find out things like that. All the questions you guys are asking are great. I think thinking about things developmentally can help you kind of keep focused. Okay, I want to stop there because if you guys have questions about things, and this is the time where if you need to jump off, that's great. You can jump off, or if you want to stay and ask questions, you can. I'm going to stick around and answer questions, as many questions as you guys have. And so please don't hesitate to ask.
Could you give some parameters on the paper, just some general things that you might be looking for, even length and all that good stuff?
So
Oh.
this is on Moodle. This is the document that describes the paper. I think the only thing I put 4 to 6 pages on here. I think that's the only thing I left off. We're looking for 4 to 6 pages. The big pieces are having at least 4 sources. One source can be the textbook, but you need to have 3 additional sources outside of the textbook. 80 points of the grade are from this area of research, like all the areas you're going to actually research: the topic, the developmental stage, the disorder, or the whatever developmental phenomenon happens in that stage, and how to treat that. And then this 15 points is just your reflection, basically answering these questions. And then of course, 5 points is for, having the correct amount of sources, the APA formatting, and making sure that you actually add a reference page. Sometimes people don't do that. I'm not sure why. Sometimes people don't do that, but this is all on Moodle. This is the basic breakdown. So does anyone have a question based on this? Is this helpful? Hopefully.
I had a question organizationally, like when just putting the paper together, are you expecting headings for each of these sections, or do you want it to just flow, or is it more based on what I'm writing?
I would put headings if I was, that's one way you make things clear, right? We have a
Okay,
heading.
that's what I
tells
figured.
me, tell me what's coming next. There's probably no reason to have, like when we look at APA, there's like 5 different types of headings, right? That start in the middle, and then there's some that are
Right.
italicized. There's only level 2 heading. I can't imagine being more than that. You're going to have a, something that says introduction, and then whatever, and then you're going to have, life stage. That might be your next level heading, and you'll probably just have those all the way through, kind of thing. I can't, does that make sense? Like there's no reason you're going to have like level 3 heading. That's probably too
Yeah,
many.
I mean, I was mostly thinking I have section 1, and then I just vamp, and then the next one would be section 2 under like each. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I
Well,
would.
now I
I
need
would.
to look.
Yeah, I would organize it and put headings on your organization so that I know what you're talking about. So I know
Okay.
when you're jumping from one thing to the next.
Perfect.
And
Okay, thank you.
that's not just for me. That also kind of, this is what I used to do when I wrote papers like this. What I would do is decide, after I've looked at all my research and kind of know what I'm going to write, kind of have an outline in my head, I would go ahead and just write all the headings for the whole paper. And
That's
then
kind of what I've done.
and then
Okay.
just fill them in. That's what I used to do. And that, and then you can move it around if you need to, and if you don't like something somewhere, you can move it. But
Okay.
does that help?
That does. Thank you.
I remember in the first Zoom when you talked about this paper, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but I think you said like, make sure you're concise and don't go over 6 pages. Is that what you said? I'm trying to remember. Did you
Yeah.
say 4 to 6 pages?
Yeah.
Okay.
6 pages gets to be, with 38 students, gets to be long.
Oh yeah. I remember, didn't you say 4 pages ideally, but
Mhm.
6 max? Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And I mean, generally speaking, in graduate school, it's usually 1 page per source, typically, is kind of your guide. So that's why I say 4 to 6, because I know some people will write more and some people will write 4. It depends on your style of writing.
If I have to add headings, that's going to add more space. If I've already constructed, I've actually put a lot of thoughts together and went through the flow of what's required, but I didn't put headings, and I got it right down to the right number of pages.
That's okay.
If I add headings, it's going to boost it to another page.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I would rather it be constructed well and clear so I can understand where you're going and what you're talking about. Then I'm not worried. Like if you're adding a heading and that makes you jump to another page, that's
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so I don't have to, oh, you still want the heading?
I want headings. I
Okay,
would like to
got it.
have, And that's part of APA style, is to have headings,
Yeah.
like to organize your paper.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have one more question, but it is not related to the paper.
That's okay.
Okay, I was looking through the grade book, and on exercise 1, you gave me a comment. But in the actual grade book, it says 0, but your comment would not match up with the 0. I was just making sure. I didn't know if maybe the grade book was incorrect, or if at first, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, maybe he goes back in and puts the grades in last. I don't know. I just wanted to check on that.
Maybe you made a 0.
I hope not. Well, your first comment was great job. So
Hang on a second. I'll tell you.
it's going to be real embarrassing if I didn't actually make a 0.
No, you didn't. There you go. Now I fixed it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I do go back and check them, check all the grades. Yeah, I miss some every once in a while. You guys feel free to check and make sure that what I have and what you're understanding is the same.
Yes, Doctor, could you just reiterate again on those questions, even in your email, about the questions in the study guide for the final may not be right? Or
So what I was saying earlier is that there's some questions that don't have answers, and there's some answers that don't have questions. You can just disregard those, because I'm always editing the study guide, and every once in a while I miss some. And sometimes what happens is the pages mess up, and then I just miss some sometimes. And there's probably a handful of questions that are hard to find in the book because we're in a different edition. So I try to change those questions too to match the edition that we're in, but I know I missed a handful of those. So if you see some that don't line up with the book, just know that they're not on the exam.
okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
You said that there are answers. I didn't see answers to the final study guide.
Answer choices. So there's a question and then
Oh, the answer choices. Okay. Okay, got you. And will the final be posted on the 12th, or is there?
it'll go live on the 11th.
Okay,
It'll be alive until midnight or 11:59 on the 16th.
okay.
And it looks exactly like the midterm, 75 questions, multiple choice. Any other questions? So I'm going to give Audra and Kara extra points because they've actually had to listen to me for almost 10 weeks in a row, because they're in my live class on Saturdays, and they've showed up to all of these classes as well. So you guys get extra credit. Which
I'll
means
take all the help I can get. So thank you.
which means they have to hear me tell the same stories over and over.
Well, I was curious, but it wasn't related to class. I was going to ask how your son did in his band competition.
Oh man.
Uh-oh.
We had highs and lows, man. We were 15 points away from going to state.
Oh.
They did great though. They did really good. They're a very small 4A school, and they beat some really big 4A schools. They just came up short, but they did a great job. It was a good experience. And we were there. I think we got home and went to bed around 1:30,
Oh.
like that. So it was a long day, but it was a good experience. We'll get them next year.
Good.
Well, you can give Jenna and I some extra points too, because we signed up for another one of your classes this next term in winter.
Yeah, which one?
Oof, I don't remember. Jenna, do you remember?
You know, I could. That's a great question.
Advanced counseling techniques. Is that
Oh,
it?
yes, it's the one we're supposed to take right before we do our practicum, but
Yes,
we
it was
asked
the
permission to take
advanced.
it.
Yeah, that's gonna be hard. I'm gonna make that class so hard.
Oh, good. Perfect.
Now's the time to take it.
That's so funny because
For it.
when one of my groups finished up early, we were talking and I don't even remember how it came up, but I was like, sign up for all of Bernard's classes. He's awesome. And I take it back. I take it all back.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm try to, yeah. So don't forget to write that on the evaluation.
I will. I definitely will. Those open today. I got an email for that.
I got an email and I'm not even a student. So I'm gonna evaluate myself.
Maybe it's so you can remind us to evaluate you.
Yeah, y'all get those emails and stuff, right? Like you get reminders. Yeah. Yeah, I actually use, I really pay attention to them. It does help me to like I've made changes to all my classes based on some feedback, not everybody's feedback, but there's some feedback that's really good.
Can I ask a question? This is Sarah.
Yes.
So I'm signed up for counseling assessment. It looks like you're teaching in next session. And then my last session will be in the spring. And then it says you're teaching counseling, advanced counseling skills. Is that accurate? I'm just curious why they're taking advanced counseling skills. I just don't want to miss something because I want to be done with all my coursework in May to start practicum. And I don't know if I'm doing this the wrong way or if this is set up the right way.
So
skills.
We had to take, we asked Dr. Milliken if we could take his class next because we were trying to do all the online classes because there's a couple that you have to take in person. And so we were kind of looking at our schedule of classes and we were having to adjust and move things so that any in-person classes we were taking were during the summer when we were off from school. And so that's why we're taking his class earlier, because usually you would take that one right before you begin your practicum.
Okay.
But because we're just trying to take as many online as we can.
All right, just making sure. I've never really asked anyone. I've just sort of just planned out my schedule and it's been working, but I would hate to get to the point where I think there's a course and then it's like not offered when I need it. But
yeah, I don't know what's offered in the spring.
If you go to the Amberton website and click on, because that's what I did for Danielle and I went through and like pretty much planned out all of our things so that we could start practicum next spring. But since we're a little bit further away, we're down in Waxahachie. So to make the drive, we wanted to do the least amount of in-person as possible for obvious reasons. And so if you go to the Amberton website and click on the like programs and courses and then go to counseling and look on the website, it'll show up if you like, what's it called? Like you search for counseling courses, it'll show you when it's offered online and when it's offered in person, but almost all of the courses are always like offered, if that makes sense. It's just depending on whether it's online or in person.
okay, thank you.
Yes, of course. And actually both of our classes, Danielle, are with him. So you'll get us twice over the winter.
Oh, counseling assessment.
Yes, we're taking assessment and then the advanced counseling skills.
Well, that sounds like that's going to be fun. Yeah, I don't even know what I'm teaching in the spring. I won't find out until December.
Do you get any say in that or no? Do they just kind of assign you?
No, I mean, no, we all kind of teach the same thing. I don't know why I'm teaching this advanced class this time.
I just noticed too, because I know someone just brought it up, but I found out that advanced counseling ethics, that's only offered in the winter and summer, not if that's part of your curriculum. That's of course it's required. Yeah.
I have that down to take in March. That is not summer.
Well, may want to double check it. I looked at that course or the course rotation.
Yeah.
And then I spoke to an advisor Monday, but
I think maybe that's an elective as well. Like it looked like you could take either. It didn't look because it had like a block and you could pick one,
Right.
and one was ethics and the other was advanced ethics. I don't.
got it.
Oh, I've taken ethics, but I thought I had to take
I could be wrong.
Oh,
But
no.
Dr. Bedard,
I have anxiety now.
do you teach the pre-practicum class?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Here's,
yeah.
here's counseling ethics.
But what
So-
about the advanced counseling ethics?
I don't think it's required,
Oh, if it's not required, that'd be awesome.
but I'm not sure.
I don't know what these symbols mean.
One's
Online and-
electronic and one is, yeah.
The
It looks like-
pencils and flat and, in person, and then the laptop.
Looks
in
like these
blue.
are in person, spring, summer, fall, and this one is distance in winter. So it looks like it's every semester. What's what it looks like to me.
I think it does change though. Like, I don't know if this is showing 2023 or
This
this
is-
is still
this-
2022.
Yeah, this is the website, so I have no idea.
See on my degree plan, which was what, this most recent one, it shows advanced counseling ethics and counseling ethics, that they're both required. So I guess I need to
Yeah.
call them. Thank you for,
That's what I was
Thanks for
told.
pointing that
I
out.
had to take both, but I just want to make sure that's offered, in March, or else my whole plan is going down the drain. This is going to work out. I'm hoping to be done by May.
They do change because Jen and I were planning on
Uh-huh.
taking a different class, but it wasn't offered, and it wasn't offered originally. Like it was not for this winter like we had originally planned. It got moved, so we had to pick a different class.
Yeah,
good to know.
sometimes like some things will change, some classes will
Yeah.
change. I only know what they tell me and I just do it.
I'm sorry, I'm slow. Can we go back to the finals study guide?
Mhm.
I didn't notice any questions that didn't have any answers. There might have been questions that didn't have good answers. So now I'm concerned that I might have done the wrong study guide.
Is it the final study guide?
Yeah, and it's like I'm under the Welcome to Lifespan Development page on Moodle, and it's like the 6th choice. I mean, it has a spring 2019 date on it. I want to make sure I did the right.
Yeah, it's
Research.
fine. As long as it's the final study guide.
Okay, I did the right one then. Okay,
Yeah, you're good.
you guys are more meticulous than I am.
I'm just going off of what usually I do miss a few things when I'm editing,
Okay,
when I'm going through it. So just as a heads up,
appreciate it.
maybe I caught all of them this time. That's possible.
Okay, there was a couple that I'm like, I don't know if I like all these answers, but I just
Well,
chose the lesser
yeah.
of
The
evils. but-
study guide should be harder than the exam. I think the exams should
Well,
be pretty
it's-
easy.
Okay, great. I like hearing that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. All right. So now you can go do something else. And Eileen, thanks for getting up early with us.
Yeah, 7 a.m. I had to get up at I got up at 6:16 this
Wow.
morning. And it
yeah,
was
yeah.
dark and it was cold in California, which is really rare.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, I love it. Thank you. I'm thoroughly enjoying every
Good.
minute.
Good. All right. Hey, well, some of you apparently I will see in the winter, and then 2 of you I'll see next week.
Have a great week.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye, guys.
Bedard. Really
Thanks, Dr.
appreciate
Bedard.
your class has been awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.